So let's go back to this. So my name is Robin Klein. I am the president of the Peekskill Arts Alliance, and I wanted to welcome everyone to this webinar. We are very excited to have Wesley Wofford here with us with our distinguished panel, who should all look fairly familiar to you Peekskill folks. We got Carla Ray Johnson moderating, and Joanne Brody, Carol Bash, Wilfredo Morel on the panel. Did I miss anyone? No, I think we're good. We wanted to just take this opportunity to thank the Peekskill Bid and LaFern Joseph for being instrumental in bringing Wesley's fabulous sculpture of Harriet Tubman to Peekskill. And I also wanted to take a moment to thank Larry D'Amico for his brilliant idea and for contacting Wesley and making this webinar happen. Just a couple of words about logistics for tonight. That is that if you have something to say, please use the Q&A function, but please note Carla Ray will be fielding those and we won't be responding to them until after the presentation. So be patient, and it's also quite possible we won't have a chance to get to all of them, and some of them may be redundant. So we will do our best. This is actually our first time doing a webinar. And if you want to ask something of a specific panelist, please indicate that so we know who you'd like to have answer. That's it for me. I now become the Peekskill Arts Alliance and will enjoy the show with you.
Thank you so much, Robin, and thanks to the PAA for hosting this. I also want to reiterate what Robin said about the Peekskill Bid, bringing the Wesley Wofford sculpture to Peekskill, and to Sisters in Support, LaFern Joseph in particular, for making it all happen. You know, when Harriet arrived in town, she really stirred things up again, and we got her some really dramatic lighting. We've had dancers and musicians respond to the sculpture. The sculpture looked fabulous with a coating of snow, Wesley. It really emphasized the movement and the lines. And some young people in Peekskill through New Era Creative Space have been responding to Harriet Tubman. They've been reading and researching and writing poetry, and really connecting Harriet's work with Black Lives Matter and the work that's ongoing. So thanks to Wesley in particular, but everyone else as well. So I'm excited about tonight because about 30 years ago, when I first moved to Peekskill, one of the very first sculptures I created was an homage to Harriet Tubman. And the Underground Railroad, learning about the Underground Railroad, taking the tour with LaFern, also inspired some of my work that related to that subject. I'm predominantly a sculptor. I also do drawings and conceptual performance art and interactive art. So that's my introduction to me. Each of our panelists are going to introduce themselves, and we're going to start with Wilfredo Morel. Wilfredo.
Wow. Wesley, quite a remarkable pleasure to meet someone who kind of speak the language that I speak, which is in social justice and equality. And is basically using our talent to really not so much to show the public or the people about the technical part of sculpting and all that, but really using it as a tool to create raising consciousness. Myself, I'm a sculptor. I'm a humble member of the Hudson Valley region. And I say the Hudson Valley region because I try to take as much, because that's how it works for us. When we put our word out there, when we are trying to make sure that folks hear us, we had to take over the entire space. And I see you doing that, you know, for what I read. I am a sculptor as well. One of the projects that I've been working on for the past 15 years is in raising consciousness about sustainability for our farm, using found farm equipment, and then creating subjects out of that, but subjects that relate to the life of farm workers. And the only thing I'm trying to do is to create conversation, just like what you're doing, by creating this iconic leader, but also what he means for Peekskill and the Hudson Valley region. So again, with that, I keep my mouth shut, and then as we start, then we'll share more about ourselves. But thank you once again for treating us with a piece of history, but again, another talking point, which is equality and social justice for all.
Thank you very much, Wilfredo. And now I would like Carol Bash to introduce herself.
Well,
Carol?
hi. Yes. Hi, everyone. And Wesley, it's nice to meet you as well. I'm Carol Bash. I'm one of the newer members of the Peekskill Arts Alliance. I'm a filmmaker, and I know you have a history as a special effects makeup artist in film. I don't even know if we're going to even get to be able to talk about that tonight, but I'm in the documentary space, so I'm at the poor end of the film industry. And primarily I work with subjects having to do with African American history and culture, and social and economic justice. Basically, I was asked to talk a little bit about, and it'll be short, about what it is to document social justice heroes and sheroes. And it struck me that what really moved me so much about your work as the Harriet Tubman sculpture was just that, in looking at the face of Harriet Tubman that you so powerfully portrayed, I realized that it's not just about Harriet, but her face really is timeless, as far as it could have been my great-grandmother, it could have been my mother, my aunts, all the African American heroes and sheroes of determination, resilience, resistance, fighting for freedom, up until today. The mothers and the sisters of the Black Lives Matter movement, looking at the mothers that lost their children to, a huge and criminal, injustice system that we're fighting against in today's, society. So I just want to thank you for the timelessness of your piece. And, it's what I strive for in my work when it comes to documenting people's journeys. And I kind of want to see that expression that is in the Harriet Tubman statue, that kind of power and anger, but also not giving up. And so I really just want to also say, I'm going to throw it out there, Wesley, as a white man, seeing us, and really bringing that to the fore, because there's a lot of people who are not of color who don't see that. And you did with your statue. And so I thank you. And I also look forward to hearing about what your inspiration was for Harriet. Thank you so much.
Wow, thank you, Carol. And now I'm pleased to introduce Joanne Brody.
So I'm Joanne Brody. I'm local. I've lived in this community almost all my life, and I'm fairly old. I'm a figurative sculptor. I am also someone who has been very active in placing sculptures in Highland Falls, on the streets, at Sandy Saunders Farm, which is what you see behind me, and most recently in Tilly Foster Farm. And I've gotten a lot of experience in how one places public art. because there's special things about public art. Public art at its worst is art by committee. At its best, it's what we have here. Thank you. It's really beautiful. And I respond to it personally because there's so much gesture and movement in it. And most of my sculpture is about gesture and movement. But art in public spaces, it gives us a chance to define the space. The art has to be, I'd say, life-size or bigger. Scale is very, very important. The purpose of public art is to make one think, to make one feel. And there's also a very important element about fitting a sculpture in public to its audience. And for those of you who are familiar in Peekskill with Hudson Valley Mocha, which is very, very contemporary art, you know that very often the sculpture that we have placed around town has not been met with great acclaim. It's just reached its audience. And when you walk past the sculpture in the middle of town and you see people stopping and showing, and you see that people are making an effort to come and see it, it's not just people at random, it's people who are stopping and coming and thinking and talking. And that's all I want to say.
Thank you very much, Joanne. I really appreciate what you said about scale. When I had seen the image of the placement of Wesley's sculpture a number of times online and on the computer prior to going to actually being there in person. And it was very impressive. But when I was there in person, of course, it took on a whole nother element, and that had to do, I believe, with its scale, because I had seen it from every angle pretty much online. I have also, I know I'm going to ask Wesley to really give us a lot of information and tell us what he wants to tell us. But I do have a question that I hope you'll hit on when you speak at some point. Wesley, if you have seen the placement or images of the placement of the sculpture in downtown Peekskill and how you feel about where she is, because I know everyone in Peekskill feels like that was a space that was just crying out for something, and there could not have been anything better put in that spot in Peekskill than what is there right now. So with no further ado, Wesley, please take it away.
Thank you all. I think I'll jack into my headset just so you'll be able to hear me better, hopefully. How's that? Does it seem to be better, maybe?
Yeah, there's less
Yeah.
echo.
Yeah, it's a big vacuous studio, so it can kind of bounce around and be maybe not so conducive to this sort of setting. First off, I want to say if we do technically like get kicked off or something, just hang out for a second and I'll be right back. I mean, occasionally when I'm doing Zoom meetings out here, because we're beaming a signal from the house to get to the studio. Sometimes it'll kick me off and then it'll just cycle back on. So I'll be right back. Yeah, I mean, I guess if there becomes any kind of lag or you can't hear me, somebody just speak up and say, hey, you disappeared for a second or something, just to get the technical things out of the way. And then otherwise, just first, I just want to say thanks for having me tonight. And it's nice to meet you all, especially in COVID times. There's a severe lack of human interaction on our part. So any opportunity to get together with people with like-minded brains is I love it. So thank you. And thank you for all the kind words about the piece and hosting the piece there. It's fantastic. so there's a lot of things to hit on there that in introduction. So maybe I'll kind of hit on those. So we had put a slideshow together, and it was really more about the technical aspects of how the piece was created. And we can talk about that, or we could have a more kind of in-depth conversation about some of the issues you talked about, social justice and public art. And I guess I'm open. I didn't really write anything to say tonight. You're just getting the authentic, off the top of my head me. So we can do the slideshow, which is a very kind of just a technical of how the piece came to be and that sort of thing. But if we can really sail through this slideshow if you want to go into more of the social justice conversations. I mean, there was some really interesting stuff brought up with social justice and even the part of public art and what it plays in our lives, and documentary and filmmaking. Yes, I'm an Academy Award winner and member, and so we watch a lot of documentaries during award season for nominations and voting, and I love documentaries. But yeah, so I mean, I guess we'll sail through this pretty quickly, and then maybe we can get to a more deeper, more meaningful conversation. And I guess I'll just say next slide. Maybe that's the best way. Odyssey's my studio director, kind of my partner in crime. She runs everything. I mean, I push Clay, and Odyssey does pretty much everything else. So she put this slideshow together just to kind of, we've had a lot of questions about how I work and how the piece came to be. And she also is the driving force behind the Journey to Freedom traveling exhibition. So if there is any questions, she's kind of sitting off screen here. So if anybody has any questions for her, it's a Sunday night, so she didn't want to come on screen, but she's sitting right next to me and I can just ask her the question. So yeah, this is just the intro slide. I guess it gives you a little bit of sense of just working on a scaffolding on a large piece like this. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So for me, yeah, I mean, this kind of blows through sort of my process. So I end up sculpting these things usually at least 3 times. So I start with a design maquette, and then I move through a 3rd scale model, and then a head study, which is a 3/4 head study, and then I go to the full size monument. So this process is kind of describing some of that. So you can see here the design maquette. So I work with, I build my own articulated skeletons out of 3D printed kind of custom little skull. It's essentially a skull, rib cage, pelvis that I build little custom armatures for. So I work in oil-based clays. I sculpt over aluminum and steel and 3D printed armatures. They're proportional skeletons, usually based on a specific model or models. I do a design maquette. Those tend to be like 8th scale or 10th scale, somewhere in there, pretty small, little like 6-8 inch figures. And I kind of figure out where I'm going, because any commission just starts with like this commission was, we want Harriet Tubman with a child. And that was pretty much all I got from the client. And so it was, I mean, that could look 100,000 different ways. So I start to work with a client about, what do we want to say with the piece? What do we want to convey? What do we want the viewers to feel or draw from the piece? What are the attributes that you want to bring to light with the sculpture? And I usually ask for like a list of keywords of those types of things to kind of get started. And I work on these little study maquettes. Sometimes there's 2 or 3 But usually by the time I'm ready to present to a client, I've already kind of solidified the one I like. And there's usually very specific reasons. So in the one picture here, you can see the 10th scale study model, the 3rd scale model in progress, and then the 3/4 scale head study. So the 3rd scale models are actually everything I do. I sculpt the figures in the nude first, just because the figures drive the clothes. They drive the action. There's nothing worse than the coat wearing hand sculptures you see where there's no body underneath. So everything, which is the figurative tradition dating back hundreds of years, nudes first, then clothing. So the 3rd scale studies tend to be nudes for enlargement. With this Harriet, there was a lot of billowing dress. So I put the lower dress and the satchel on the 3rd scale. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And so we hire models always, and we also have a seamstress that we work with. Now we skipped ahead there. Well, we really skipped ahead. I mean, I can really speed up if. Go back one more to the, yeah. There you go. Okay, so these were my 2 models for these 2 figures. We worked with a seamstress and a history museum. So the satchel and the jacket were from a history museum, and the dress, both dresses and the vest were custom made from a seamstress. Historical research is very important to us. Odyssey does a lot of that. I also think that, especially like somebody said, I'm a white man. That's the elephant in the room. I think, but I'm also a human being. So I think that specifically figurative sculpture, it's my job to be a filter or a megaphone. It's not my job to put myself into the work as much as try to channel who the person is. And so I believe in reading lots of first person documents if I can get my hands on them, and historical documents, as much reading as I can to try and get in the head of the person. I think that's really important. And so yeah, these are my models. You can kind of see them in the poses. We had big industrial fans to try and get that dress to blow like a flag. We built a period dress, and then we ended up increasing the square footage of fabric. We doubled it so that we could really get someone billowing with the fan. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So this is the 3rd scale model and the drapery going on. So it's nude studies with shoes, because I didn't really need Harriet's feet. The shoes were also from a history museum and they were Civil War era shoes, one size fits all. Also, there's no right, no left. There's just a shoe, put it on whichever foot you can jam in there. So these are the nude studies, and then getting the drapery on. I like to do my drapery with aluminum wire covered in clay, so I can really kind of sculpt those shapes and find that those design lines and compositional choices. So that's my preferred method. Again, we put the model in front of 2 big industrial fans, and we shot footage of her holding the pose in slow motion. So then I could freeze frame and look and learn what happens to drapery going over a leg like that, and kind of pick and choose what I liked. Let's go to the next slide. So once those 3rd scales are done, we 3D scan those. So these are the 3D scans, and we take these digital models and we enlarge them to the monumental size. So the 3rd scale model is about 30 inches tall. And then once we scan that, we enlarge that to, I think this figure was like 7, the figure was 7 feet tall. So yeah, it's about 7 feet tall in the computer. We enlarge that model. We offset that digital model about 1/4 of an inch to accommodate for the clay that I'm going to pile back on top. and then we mill those shapes out of foam. You can go ahead and go to the next slide, and you can see the foams. So we get those foams generally in a couple of pieces. So I have to get a bunch of metal inside those just to support the weight of the clay. Even though it's a mostly foam object, there's still a pretty substantial amount of clay that gets packed on top of that. So we cut those foams up, we hollow them all out. We put metal all in them. Also for these, I kept them a little bit adjustable. I like to be able to pose the heads full size. Usually the hands I make metal armatures for, so I can continue to evolve the sculpture as it's large. Go ahead and go to the next slide. You can see these foams going together. Then we cover those foams in like a 3D printing resin that stiffens them up a little bit. And you can see the head still has some posability. And the child on this one, she was still posable at the waist and the head and the arms. So we covered in resin, and then we cover that in clay. And then finally get to start sculpting again. Go ahead, the next slide. And then that clay just starts to, so I add a lot of the clothes at full scale because it allows me some freedom to see how that feels as a human being large. And so you can see I add the coat and the vest and a lot of the wrinkles, and the face just gets more and more refined, and anatomy in the arms. And all of that is built on the foundational anatomy that was figured out in 3rd scale. So this process, I mean, so this whole commission took, it was about an 18-month commission. This portion of it, I think I sculpted on the monumental size for about 3.5 or 4 months. Go ahead and go to the next slide. You can see some hand casts in the foreground there. I like to, lots of times we'll hand cast our models just to get that information. So from there, we mold that object. You can see here, it's lots of shims. The clay is finished and approved, and everyone is happy, including me. And we divide that up with the foundry. How large a panels can we cast in bronze at a time, which tends to be about a 2-foot by 3-foot panels, about as big as you can pour in one crucible dump. So we break the object up into panels that are castable, and knowing how we're going to reassemble this object. The heads always get, that's one pour, and they get molds in the round, so there's no seams and no welding on the faces. So go on to the next slide. And we work with a foundry, so they brought a mold crew in of 4 to mold this, and it takes them, those 4 guys, it took them about 5 days to mold this. So after all the pieces are broken up, everything gets covered in silicone and gets covered in silicone again. They use 2 colors, the orange and the blue, so they can keep track of how thick you want that silicone to be, about 1/4 inch thick. You can see there, everything gets covered. So you're capturing all the detail of the clay with the silicones. Next slide. On top of those silicones are hard shells. So these hard shells were FGR and a chopped monofilament. So it makes them strong but lightweight. And then we also embed metal into those. And you can see each panel has a number. So there were 41 panels on this sculpture. So when we cast this, it was 41 pieces of bronze welded back together. So go ahead and go to the next slide. Those molds get opened, as you can see. So the hard shell cradles the soft and holds all the detail, and they kind of snap back in. And it kind of destroys the sculpture in the process. I mean, it's still somewhat intact, as you can see, as we're pulling it off. But it's pretty much, it's a process of destroying to create. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So then those molds go to the foundry. I thought we had some wax pictures in here, but maybe not. So there's, go one more slide. Maybe this one's just out of order. Maybe not. Okay, so we'll pick up. Out of those molds, we cast waxes. Those waxes tend to be 1/4 of an inch thick. And then we make ceramic shells on those, which is what we are breaking off here in these pictures. So the ceramic shells are the molds that allow us to cast the bronze. That previous slide was the act of pouring the molten bronze into these molds. And then this is us essentially sledgehammering the ceramic shell off. And so you can see there's lots of pieces of bronze, all the individual pieces. And then you can go to the next slide. All of those get welded together. So you can see here the finished bronze and the where the welds are. Again, it's 41 panels that have to be reassembled back into this object. So you can see those welds there. It's quite an arduous process. I mean, there's an entire team of foundry behind us, so I don't take credit for this work. They are amazing. They laid those welds on and then blend those welds into my textures. You can see here in the bottom left picture that they actually welded her head on incorrectly. And so when I arrived at the foundry, we actually cut her head back off and put it in the correct placement. And I think those little things, I mean, I don't know if you can feel it, but when I look at that, the head placement on the right doesn't feel as formidable as the head placement on the left. And I think it illustrates how important those small little details are. Like the head on the left is perseverance, formidable woman, and the one on the right, I'm just not feeling it. It's amazing what a little tweak like that can do. It's a good slide for that. Let's go to the next one. So yeah, this is the assembly of the Journey to Freedom one. So we fabricated a base separately, and we built that platform into the base for forklifts to be able to move it around. The bronze is bolted. The base was core tin, so it would rust. That's that assembly. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So we dry fit that first before we do patinas. Here's the patina process. It's lots of different acids, lots of different underlayers to get to where we're going. I think it's, you can make an object that looks brown or black or green, but I don't think, and there are acids, you could just put one acid on, but I think the beauty of bronze is that you can build up those layers of cuprics and ferrics and liver sulfurs and dance around and find this beautiful finish with depth and richness. Next slide. That might be the end. Yeah, and then she comes to Peekskill and every other location that she's been. So I think that's the end of that slideshow, and then we can just kind of go into and then just talk a little bit about so the traveling show. The commission was a commission. It was a oneer for a client in Texas. But once we released images of that, it happened to land like right in the middle of everything that was happening. I mean, because we started that commission in 2018, and the George Floyd hadn't happened. Like a lot of the Black Lives Matter protests haven't started yet. And so really when that sculpture landed, it just happened to be at the right time to have a strong voice to talk about that conversation. And so I feel, and that's another thing, like it felt a little opportunistic, like how everything worked out, but it really was just serendipitous that she landed at the same time. And really it was, one of our other clients had seen images right after Odyssey posted the initial images after it was installed and unveiled in Texas. We weren't allowed to show any images until then. So when she released those pictures, I mean, Upworthy picked it up. I mean, it went viral. There was millions of people that shared it and saw it and commented, and it just exploded. And right about the same time, all the protests were happening. All of that was just kind of ramping up. But the other big motivator, there was a Harriet Tubman movie coming out. There was discussions about Harriet Tubman being on the $20 bill. And so another client of ours, we were just at lunch and he was looking at this outpouring of love for this sculpture on social media. And he's like, you need one of these out in the world, like not in that client's house. Like people need to get to this. How do we make that happen? And so literally it was just a lunch with these clients. And we were like, yeah, I mean, maybe we could cast another one and travel the artist print around or something. I mean, this isn't how we operate. We don't really move sculptures around or build programs like this. But he was like, well, I'll fund it. And then you pay me back over time with stipends. And he wrote us a check right there. And we called the foundry and said, start casting one. And we're going to figure out what to do with it. And then it was just like trying to find locations like Peekskill. And it's booking itself at this point. I mean, there were the first couple of venues that Odyssey kind of had to chase down to pitch what we were doing. And since then, she gets a couple of calls a week from other cities that want to host it. And so really it was about how to structure that. We wanted to make it affordable and accessible to everyone, as opposed to this. I mean, you stick works in private collections or museums, and they're not speaking to the right people. I mean, they're amazing and they're speaking, but we really wanted to make it so that she could be anywhere. And you know, whether it's a school or a library or, you know, an area that can't afford public sculpture or an area that she'll really speak. I mean, we've had lots of conversations about the lack of representation of people of color in public art. And that is a huge problem in this country, and it's a problem that needs to be corrected. And so getting her in spaces where she can inspire. I mean, we've had other conversations about, you know, why are there not more prominent Black artists in America? And I mean, it's a systemic system of people with my skin color that are doing these things, and it's a myriad of layers of problems, and maybe one of them is that all of the figurative public works in the nation are mostly white people. And so white children are inspired to maybe make objects like that because they're inspired looking at them. So if you're a child of color and you don't have that inspiration, then maybe you'll never aspire to be a sculptor or an artist that creates pieces like that. So I think that's one small piece of the puzzle in a deluge of problems that need to be addressed. What? So yeah, Odyssey directing me off camera here. So I mean, maybe we could take some questions or just kind of have a dialogue back and forth. I mean, anything else, anything you guys want to talk about? I'm an open book.
Sure, let's see if we have questions from the other three panelists first, and then we do have a few questions showing up on the Q&A. So does one of you have a comment or question for Wesley?
Well, I do, and thank you so much, Wesley, for that incredible presentation. I mean, I'm not a sculptor. I'm just in awe of the amount of work that goes into it. But could you delve a little bit more deeply about how you wanted to pose Harriet with the child? You said that you know, what was the commission wanted basically Harriet with a child, but it was really up to you to sort of decide, what then. Could you talk a little bit more about the posing and just the look of the piece?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, I mean, so it was, their notes were Harriet Child. It was going in front of they wanted it to represent freedom. The theme, the main theme from them was freedom. And some of the other notes that I got from them was they want to convey the struggle to get there, like the types, just illustrate that it was a lot of hard work on and not some ephemeral, concept of hard work, but they wanted to see that struggle physically. So as I sort of moved some figures around and thought about conceptually how to convey a narrative that I think is important, and sort of embed some emotional resonance that maybe would speak to a lot of different people. It really came about, I wanted Harriet, first off, I wanted Harriet to just look like so formidable. I mean, when I read the first person accounts, like her talking about her experiences, there's also a lot of Underground Railroad literature, like journals of when she would come into a safe house with a group, they would take notes. And it was always fun to hear like other first person accounts of people, interacting with Harriet. And I mean, she had a tooth hurting her on one journey. And so she took the butt of her gun and knocked her own tooth out just to get it out of her mouth and just spit it out, and was like, yeah, so anyway, let's keep going. And just like stories like that, I wanted to show that, like show what an amazing, powerful woman she was. Especially, I mean, she was a 4'9", 4'10" woman, just amazing. So I knew I wanted that for Harriet. I really wanted, as the plaques say, that talks about the history on the plaques of the specific story that I kind of dialed into about the last little girl, and that the girl that she adopted, and it was potentially her own child, but ended up being her adopted child. So I liked that connection, like a historical connection that is authentic. We weren't making up a scenario. And so I was just thinking about what that feels like. And I mean, I think a huge part of an artist, a figurative artist, and most artists is that you're an empath. You're trying to get into the heads of how other people feel. So I really liked the concept of Harriet being just especially she had done it a lot of times at this point, and so she was just like this, like she was the protector of the child. And so I wanted to use that as a sort of an emotional embedded device about that she's protective. And so that the placement of her hand is very like you would, if something was about to go down and you're an adult, and you would reach back and take a child and pull them behind you a little bit just to protect them. And so that gesture came from that. I knew I wanted her dress to really envelop the child and almost create a feeling of that protection with the dress. And then, of course, I mean, Harriet's left hand, we had talked about, because she was a woman of faith. She wore a cross, she carried a cross. She talked to God a lot. She also had narcolepsy, and she would go to sleep and talked about having visions and that God would guide her. And so we actually explored maybe her holding the cross at her neck, kind of using that as a token of to draw power from. But as we developed, it felt better. We wanted to be more about her, the human being. And so using that wind and her holding her collar And like when you're really cold, if you're in a snowstorm, like you're kind of shielding yourself. But she wasn't just shielding herself from the wind. She was shielding herself from the world that was kind of against her at the time. I mean, what she was doing was illegal, which is amazing. And so yeah, that kind of, and then it became like her stepping up and out. So we wanted, like, slavery is the low point of American history. And so we wanted her elevating her own status, and in doing that, elevating the status of everyone else that looked like her, by doing what she was doing. So that dramatic cliff became very important. I wanted her to be stepping up, up and out of the misery that she was in. So that's a nutshell. I mean, that could go on for like an hour because there is a lot of embedded things in there, but hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you so much. Beautiful.
Carla Ray, you're muted.
There have been a couple of questions. One came in before the conversation and one came up in the Q&A. People asking Wesley about the your references for the facial expression, the actual facial expression of Harriet Tubman. Can you speak briefly about that?
Yeah, so there, I mean, obviously someone living in her time, there aren't a lot of photographs of them. Unlike today, there's literally hundreds of thousands of everyone every 20 minutes. So historical reference for her, we literally we found every picture that existed of her. We also found a lot of paintings and woodcuts and just other things. I wanted any and all imagery of her that we could locate just to kind of draw from. And so the expression was really there's one specific, so a lot of her photographs came when she was older. A lot of this Underground Railroad activity, she was relatively young. And so there was one picture that they had just surfaced right prior to us starting, and it's her sitting in a dress and she's kind of leaning on a chair. And that's probably the closest age that she was. But I also feel that human beings in general, if you're trying to capture the essence of who they are, unless it's a historical event like if you're landing on the moon or something and you're Neil Armstrong, then you need him to look like he looked when he landed. But if you're trying to embody the legacy of someone, like I think about, like there's a couple of calls for John Lewis right now, and I think about what John Lewis would you do? And I think that it would be important to draw from the young activist John Lewis in Alabama to the older politician John Lewis. And so I think, and I describe it to my clients as if they think of their parents, like when I think of my mom, she's an amalgam of how she looked over the course of the entire time that I knew her, which is my entire life. So I can remember my mom when I was 5, and she was making me a birthday cake, and then I blend that with a picture of when I was 11 and she gave me some advice or took me on a walk, and then her when she at my wedding, and then her with my son. And so all of those, when I try to think of what she looked like, it's a blend of those ages. So really it was a matter of taking those historical references. My model actually didn't look much like Harriet. And so there are some things like the headband, the head wrap, and how her neck turned that I can derive from that model. But otherwise, it's a little bit of just pictures and kind of filling in the gaps, and then also drawing from what you want that face to convey. I mean, that more importantly than anything, I think a lot of sculptors get hung up on the mathematics of anatomy, and they don't feel the face. And so it's really just feeling her face, like what I wanted her to project to the world.
Thank you. That was very helpful. And I also wanted to echo what Carol said about how informative your presentation was. It was beautiful to see your working process and helpful even to a sculptor. So thank you for that. Wilfredo, go ahead.
So Wesley, so this is where we go raw. So aside from the process, outside of the clients, because when you're dealing with clients, it's like it's their way, and you had to kind of negotiate in many times. But I think that for this particular piece, we're coming to Peekskill, there's no coincidence, happening in the time that it happened, where in the world, we're going through a kind of cleansing, right? There's opportunity for everything. Even though we are living a pandemic, we are living into a society where the bottom line is that we either get along and we start conversing, or we're just going to disappear. And here you are creating a piece that is almost, to me, a universal piece, a piece that the technical part is required, the sensing that is being commissioned is required, all those things. But now I really want to go to the human part, because when we're creating things like this, man, and we are making sure that the audience gets it. And then, as you said, you went through the history, you went through the whole thing, but what did that do to you? Where right now you are right here in Peekskill, part of the Underground Railroad, where there is a history, but also there are those Harriet Tubman of this era right now that I'm sure, who has seen this piece and are relating to that piece. So putting our technical, our sculpting aside, let's talk about you and what it did to you and what it's doing and how that evolution is happening.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and more stimulating personally. I mean, I love talking tech, yeah. So as I said earlier about like the serendipity of this piece landing at this time in the world, it is not lost on me that it's amazing, actually, and I'm humbled and in awe of the reaction that this piece has gotten. I mean, in general, figurative sculpture doesn't get a whole lot of attention unless it's just horrible, like, if it's that Lucy in that town, her hometown, if it's really bad, SNL will bring it up, but otherwise, who's talking about figurative sculpture in 2021? And so I mean, at least prior to this year, now conversations about sculpture are very prevalent. I mean, because they're reassessing all of, specifically these Confederate memorials. The fact that finally, like we're looking at those things and going, why were these objects created? What do these objects, what is the purpose of public art? And what place does something like a Confederate memorial have in the world if half of the population it makes uncomfortable? And so I'm so glad that those conversations are happening right now, and they're really important. So I mean, for me, so like I said, the elephant room is like I'm a white guy and I did this Harriet Tubman. And what does that mean? And I think a big part of, I mean, we've had a lot of these conversations, and I've talked about, like, I'm happy to have these conversations, and I may even put my foot in my mouth step in it because I'm coming from a different place than other people. And so I'm totally comfortable with being told, dude, that was, I think you shouldn't have said that. And so I'm open to learning, and I've continued to evolve just as this piece travels around, because I get to have conversations like this that are outside of my circle. And those are important. And I think, I think there's a great, Mitch Landrieu, the mayor of New Orleans, gave a great speech about pulling those Confederate monuments and why. So I have a heavy Southern accent. I'm from Georgia. Like I grew up near Stone Mountain. Stone Mountain's the largest Confederate memorial in the world. When I was a kid, the KKK were on, like we had a crossroads when I was a teenager, and they would stand on at the crossroads and hand out flyers, and I would have my windows open, my doors locked, and they'd knock on the window and hold up the flyer. And it's like, I don't want it, but so like I'm coming from there. And yeah, I don't have all the answers, but I very much want to be a part of the conversation, because I think it's important. John Lewis, Martin Luther King talked about it being, this isn't a black thing or a white thing. Like we need to all work together. And so it's a human thing. And I just want to be a part of one of the humans that are having this conversation. What do you do with these Confederate memorials? Why? And as a white Southern sounding dude, I think that I can speak in ways that maybe other people can't, because maybe other white Southern dudes will listen to my voice because of the color of my face. And so if I can have a conversation that opens doors, then maybe I'm doing a little of my part. When I think about the Harriet Tubman and the icon and the legend that she is, like, I'm honored to be able to continue to amplify her message over 100 years later. And I hope that I'm doing her justice. I hope that she would be amazed that a Southern white man from Georgia is humbled and honored to sculpt a face that looks like her and to amplify her message.
Thank you.
But
Thank you.
I'd like to,
Joanne has a question, yeah.
it's not a question, I just want to say something. When I was a young girl, there were no black dolls. Black children need to see faces. When President Obama was elected, we had a president of color. When Kamala Harris took her oath of office, I cried. I bet a lot of people cried, but I was moved to tears, because along with your sculpture, along with these things, we are starting to give a visual strength to Black children. That you are part of us. You are human, just like all of us are. And I know that sounds weird, but we have to, as white people, embrace that, so that our Black friends and family stand beside us and can stand beside us. And we can stand behind them as well as next to them.
absolutely.
Yeah,
I
excellent.
100% agree. And I think that touches on, and we've had this conversation with a couple of other chats about, and I said it earlier, the prevalence of Black artists in the world. And I think that you're right. Like, you need to see those Black faces, and you need to look up to them and be inspired and have something to aspire to. And Mitch Landrieu talked about like the difference between him walking to school every day and a little black boy walking to school every day, and they both had to walk under that Robert E. Lee up on that pedestal, and how it would make him feel versus what it made that other child feel. And so I think that as these Confederate memorials come down, and I think they should come down, I think they're horrific. If you read the origins, the reasoning of a lot of those Confederate memorials going up, it was very much like Jim Crow era, like they were intentionally fabricated to suppress people. And I don't think that those objects have any place in our public squares. A lot of them are historic, famous works of art, and I'm not sold that they should be destroyed, but I think that they are excellent tools for education. Like there was one Confederate memorial, I believe is in Mississippi, and the city pulled it and then they donated it to an African-American history museum. And they put it in there and they used it as a tool to teach. And so I think that, you know, some people saying this argument, well, you know, you keep the General Lee, the Robert E. Lee, and you put a little plaque that says maybe he was a villain. And it's like, I don't think that that's enough, because the sculpture speaks, Rodin said something about sculpture speaks of the spirit, but speaks louder than the spirit. And I think it's right. These objects in public speak very loudly, much more loud than words on a plaque at the base. And so, you know, contextualizing a lionized racist in a city square, it isn't enough. It shouldn't be there. And so then the question becomes, what should be there? You know, what are our public spaces? What should that art do to our population? What kind of things? And I think there's a myriad of things that are, you know, it can provide hope, it can provide inspiration, it can mark historically important events, but those need to be equitably spread around. As far as, I mean, it took all of us to get to 2021, and you know, how should that public art convey everybody's contribution to modern society, regardless of the color of their skin?
I also want to make just throw in and make mention of the sculpture by Candy Wiley, Rumors of War, because I think it's one of the other sculptures at this particular point in time, which speak eloquently to what you're just talking about, Wesley. There's a question that just came up, which was Beth DeWitt, a local artist, is asking if you have mentored any Black artists, or you would consider mentoring any Black artists, young Black artists who might be interested in doing figurative work?
That's a great question, and really important, and it has come up quite a bit. So we're working with Cambridge, Maryland right now. So it was the second stop? So Harriet Tubman was enslaved in Cambridge. And so, yeah, it was the third stop on Journey to Freedom. It was a venue that we were incredibly honored for them to reach out to us and for her to be there. I mean, it was in front of the courthouse in Cambridge. And so we're actually working with them to do a specific Harriet for their courthouse. And we've started having these conversations. So the conversation with that has been about everything we're saying about Black faces being in public spaces in an inspirational setting, but also like how do you change that over time? And so one of them is, we need those Black faces and to inspire those children. The second is there needs to be an active reach out to those children to illustrate you can aspire to do this too. You know, if one human being can do it, another human being can do it, sort of mentality. And so we're going to need sculptors when you're an adult, so you can be a sculptor. And how do you do that? And so one way that we actually had a conversation, we're working with an advocacy group there called Alpha Genesis. And we've had these conversations. So one thing we're doing a workshop for children there. So we're doing a sculpture project over Zoom. We've put together art kits. And this was just an idea of how can we inspire children that don't have access to people like me. I mean, and you talk about like systemic racism in America and how it works. And so like, even like down to like, how does someone get recommended for a job? And people tend to recommend jobs in their social circles. And if their social circles aren't very diverse, then they're recommending people that look like them or that they know or their friend circles. And so it just builds and builds and builds and never circles back around for inclusion. So yeah, so we started talking about, let's do an art project. Let's see how this goes. Let's see if there would be any kids interested. Primarily, most of the schools around there are children of color. And a lot of them are underprivileged that don't really have access to even art supplies to be able to, especially during COVID, the schools have been shut down a lot. And so anyway, we weren't sure what the response was going to be, but they put it out there. We have our first workshop next Monday. We have 68 children enrolled. So we're going to have a Zoom with 68 children. I don't know what that diversity is going to look like right now, but I based on what Alpha Genesis has told us, it's going to be primarily children of color. And so we're just going to talk about, you know, look, just because you don't look like me doesn't mean that you can't draw inspiration from what I'm doing. And I hope that you're the next generation of me. And so I think that those conversations are very important. And so I think it's a kind of a multi-tiered approach to, we need to address public sculpture in public spaces, and it needs to be more inclusive. And then there needs to be significant reach out to children and even inclusion in the adult world, I think. And so like with my film background, I'm a member of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. And there was the Oscars So White hashtag like 2 years ago. And that started an internal dialogue within that organization of like, yeah, are we too white and why are we too white and how do we fix it? How do we address it? We need to like actively reach out to people to bring more people in to that organization to balance the scales of ethnicity within that. And we've also done it at National Sculpture Society. And I think that most of those types of entities in the United States have those ethnicity balance problems just because of the way systemic racism is built into this country. And it hasn't been corrected yet. So I think it's a multi-tiered approach all the way across. We did have a conversation today about having an intern here for this new Harriet Tubman that we're sculpting. They may offer an internship to come down and help work on the enlargement. So yeah, I'm totally open. So if whoever asked that question is a young sculptor, you know, or an old sculptor, I mean, I guess, feel free to reach out to me. Like I'm totally accessible and open. And when we had a dinner, a socially distanced dinner when we did a site visit to Cambridge. And one of the things we talked about, and I had a conversation, the film industry, same thing. I did a makeup on Chris Rock years ago. And again, I had the skill set in the film industry to do what I did for whatever reason. So we were doing, it was a Morgan Freeman, Chris Rock movie. and Chris Rock had to have this prosthetic on. And so I went to meet with him, and he's like, so I don't want you to take this the wrong way, but I'd really like a black makeup artist, a black prosthetics makeup artist to either do it. If there's somebody as good and as fast as you that can do it, I would love them to do it. No offense. And if there isn't, maybe you could have an assistant that can help you. And so I was like, yeah, whatever. I totally understand that. And there was not one. Like there was no prosthetic makeup artists that were black, that were specialized and did that thing I did. And he and I had a long conversation about that's wrong, that's messed up, and how do you fix that? And he talked about, he intentionally tries to hire, whether it's his set costumer or his makeup artist or hairstylist. I mean, I don't know how many black men that would want a white hairstylist working on their hair anyway. Yeah, I mean, it's like it has to be intentional. Like it has to be sought out, and those people have to be found and nurtured and given opportunities.
This conversation is so good. And Wilfredo has a question. We have a few more questions online. Wesley, if for any reason you have to leave, let us know. Robin or Larry, if we have to cut off, you told us an hour. We will do so if you tell us we have to. Otherwise, I think we should just keep talking because this is so good. You don't have to leave, do you, Wesley?
Carla Ray, we can keep going.
Okay, great. Thank you, Robin.
Wesley,
Wilfredo.
yeah, this is not a question, but it had to do with the opportunity that this had opened for you, and the opportunity not in the sense of becoming a very famous or an achiever in the arts, but really a true, I want to say somebody who can open the doors. And I'm going to tell you that you said a word, and it's that whole systemic racism. It is true that you have the opportunity to make a difference in young sculptors, in learning the trades, in being encouraged. But it is also true that we had to do the education to those establishments, from museums to places that hold those, have basically the power to then bring those young, those brown, brown and black and brown community, because the situation that we have, again, you have a key, you have an opportunity to engage with them, to really create a difference. But if you don't do it in the other side, they're just going to be in limbo. It is extremely important, and I love the fact that you have received that invitation, but that we still have what we call within our own black and brown, the perception that art is only for the privileged. That gallery, museum is only for the privileged. And of course, if we're going to be providing that education, raising consciousness just in that one group without addressing the other group, we're not going to go too far. So again, I see that, and this is why I'm telling you that what you had created in our patron, Harriet Tubman, it is on itself social justice, but at the same time an opportunity for you to make a difference, but that difference have to basically be in both sides. Otherwise, because we keep teaching, we keep encouraging our young black and browns, and while we have them there and they will connect with you, then by the time that they go to pursue and to ask for that opportunity, the other ones say, well, and again, systemic racism is not all verbal, but it could be signage. It should be on all that stuff. And that's the other part of the education and the empowerment that we have to do. I think that you have a journey. I'm telling you, this particular sculpture to me is, and I'm one of those that take things as a sign the timing and all that. And I really wish you the best. But remember that the education, the raising consciousness had to be both. You had to go to the ones that say, oh, but we want to bring them. Oh, I have one, because listen, I mean, that when you talk about the insanity of grants, okay, where it said in order for you to do this, we lose our population, we lose our community. So again, it's extremely important, and that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Wilfredo. There was another question came up. Our very own Saul Miranda has asked this question. If you know the final destination for the Harriet sculpture, the Journey to Freedom, and maybe just name some of the other cities and towns and places you know where she's going next.
Okay. And just to touch on, yeah, I mean, Wilfredo, I think that that's an excellent point, that I think that if there's a way that I can use the color of my skin to open a door that's gonna help this social, this activism move forward. I mean, for me, like that's more important than anything. Like I have sculptor friends that work mostly in galleries, and they do gallery works. And one of them, who's an older sculptor friend, talked about, you know, I've spent my entire life making baubles for the rich, and I'm not sure that it was time well spent. And that just like hit me on the side of the head. Like, I don't want to spend my time making baubles for the rich. Like how do I make the world a better place? And I feel that in the last, I mean, with this Harriet Tubman, I kind of feel like it was the beginning of where I want to be. I mean, I've always been interested in the public space. But I mean, it's got my focus about how I want to spend my time in a whole different headspace. I mean, things that I want to talk about, things that I find important. I mean, this piece behind me it's a women's monument, and it's a Cherokee woman, a Black woman, and a pioneer woman. Pioneer woman will get clothes on. She's just the last in line. But it's talking about exactly that. So, I mean, as an artist, I find nothing more inspirational than that. As far as the Journey to Freedom, so I'm contractually, I'm not allowed to sell this. My client, in our contract, our commission contract, I could have an artist print on exhibition, but I'm not allowed to, it's not allowed to be anywhere else. So this copy is my artist print, and hopefully it'll travel around indefinitely. And, you know, and eventually it'll just be next to my studio. You know, hopefully that doesn't happen, but that's where it's going to land once it's done. But it's already, I mean, Odyssey's to the side. So it's booked into 2023 as of right now. And she wrote me a list. So it's going to, I'll just kind of blow through these. It's going to Halifax, North Carolina next. Then it goes to Haverstraw, New York. Then it goes back to Cape May, New Jersey. Cape May they had opened a new Harriet Tubman museum. And she arrived, and then they were shut down due to COVID. So it essentially sat in their building for 3 months, and they could never open. So it's revisiting that, just because they didn't really get a chance to show it. It was inside. Then it goes to Silva, North Carolina, which is very close to the studio. And that's a fascinating venue. They have a Confederate memorial in front of their courthouse. So like there's been a dialogue there about like the NAACP is bringing the Harriet to be in a park right next to, so it's adjacent to this Confederate memorial, and they're hoping that will stimulate a dialogue about that very important topic of what do we do with this thing. Then it goes to Philadelphia, which is an amazing city to be in. It's going to be there for 2 months. They haven't chosen a location. I think it's going to go somewhere in Fairmont Park, which I'm incredibly excited about because that to me is one of my favorite cities. I love the public art in that city. Then it goes to White Plains, New York. Then it goes to Auburn, New York, and then it goes to Rochester, New York. Yeah, and then she's got 4 or 5 other venues that she's talking to at the moment. So it's just an ongoing thing. Hopefully it'll just continue to book itself. It hasn't even gone like to the Midwest really, or we've had some people reach out. We've had Chicago and some other place in Indiana and another Texas venue, California. So hopefully she won't run out of venues to continue to have this discussion.
Wonderful. Carol, do you have any other comments or questions?
No, not at this time.
Okay, I just wanted to touch base and see if you did.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that the other questions have been answered really nicely. They're kind of, and there's a lot of praise on here for you, Wesley. So if you want to scroll through before you get off the Zoom, you might want to check that out. So the facial expression, yeah, we pretty much covered all of those things. Do any of panelists have any additional comments or no? Okay.
I just want to briefly thank you, Wesley, for your honesty, your, as Wilfredo said, your rawness. You brought it. I do wish you well on your journey as well. And so much more fascinating to talk with you human to human, as opposed to just talking a whole bunch of techniques and whatnot, which were incredible too. But I thank you for just being present and being with us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I appreciate your passion and the conversation between you and Wilfredo about the journey, which I think we are all on at this point in time. And we all have quite a long ways to go. And I think Harriet would agree. So thank you very much. Thank you, Robin, Larry. And
I want to say thank you too.
yeah.
Thank you, Wesley.
And I want to say, and thank you. I mean, every time I have one of these conversations, like I learn so much from just these conversations about what's important, what other people think is important, like what is my role in the world, and what are other artists' roles in the world. I mean, it sounds like we have a lot of artists on this this Zoom, and yeah, I mean, I think we all need to be having these conversations more and more often. I think that's, like Wilfredo said, like we have to continue to push this change as artists. Like it's our job, like it's our responsibility, and I hope that these conversations happen over and over and over. And I mean, that's how we shift the needle in the right direction. So thank you for all the insight that you brought. And I mean, you illuminated me tonight on even more. So, and beyond that, just thank you for having her in Peekskill. I mean, I love that location. It's been so fun to see the images as it snowed and the mural behind her, and just somebody mentioned the lighting. It was so dramatic. And I mean, it was just like the love that she's received there. And it sounds like there's been a lot of great dialogues around the piece. And so we're just, we're thrilled at the reception. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, panelists. Thank you for everyone who tuned in and everyone who listened. I'm sure that you got everything that you hoped you'd get from this discussion. Thank you.
Hey, and the apprentice question, feel free to pass you can share my information as far as if anybody wants to reach out to me or email just to ask questions. I mean, again, we that dialogue we had when we were in Cambridge, we got a couple of, there was someone who wanted to be a beauty makeup artist. So I hooked her up with a magazine makeup artist that I know in California to kind of mentor her. And so there were a couple of those types of conversations. So anyone that knows of someone who would want to just talk to me as a figurative artist or pick my brain or maybe apply for an apprenticeship or an internship, feel free to share our information. We think that's very important.
That's great. You all heard that now. Okay, very generous. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was
Thank
fun.
you.
Everybody have a great night. It was nice to meet you all.
Wonderful to meet you.
Same here.
Okay, good night all.
Night.